This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer's Life. And as you can see by the title of today's episode, it's called A Solitary Writer's Life. And I think one of the reasons I want to do this is because I think a lot of the time readers don't really understand the process that writers use or what they actually do in the creation of their stories. I thought I would just take some time out, and if there are new writers out there who are listening in, this may be really useful to them as I go through some of the finer points of my own work in life. Now, to a degree, when I published Curio's Summer, which is the second book of the Curio Chronicles, I did actually write in an awful lot of my own routines as Abigail when she sits down to write what becomes in the series of stories that she writes, the Seeds of Summer book. And in the book, Birch gets to kind of sit back and see Abigail actually writing her books and see the focus and the concentration. So I thought what I'd do today is I'd just kind of highlight that, and I'd look back to some of the things I've done and some of the things I've actually written in the past, which have been used on other platforms. It's quite surprising, really, to realise that I've been published now for 14 years, although I've been writing for as long as I can actually remember. I mean, writing for me was a hobby. It's just something I did when I was bored or feeling extra creative and needed to get that creative energy out. So for most of my writing, I've written a lot of stuff, and a lot of the stuff I've written over the years, before I started really taking writing seriously, was lost or binned, in big cleanouts, which is a bit of a shame now because, there's a few things from the past I wouldn't mind still having so that I could rework them. In recent years, I've been lucky enough to have been able to have published 14 books, and I'm working on the 15th now, which hopefully will be due out later this year. And I spend my days writing more and promoting those that are out there, and I've reached sort of an all-important point where I've sat back and taken a long look at how things have gone for me. Now, this podcast is kind of, to a degree, a record of my experiences to share, especially with other new writers and those who love to read. So I've set out a few observations that may or may not help or interest other people. The first thing that is the most noticeable is the way that I now live my life today. If I look back 16 years ago, I had to leave my business shop due to a council decision to remodel the area and give up my business to spend every day at home dedicated to finishing what was a series that I'd started writing back then and finally became the S the Kingdom series. In a sense, I was getting older and I was tired of working outside in the wet and the cold. So the good thing from the decision that I made was that life got a lot quieter and warmer. It's a move that I don't regret, as I think it has actually done me a lot of good. I've worked hard with a very little time off for many years, and I'm not getting any younger. So it's nice to slow down and spend more time at home with my family, something that actually has become massively important to me. Although there are those odd days when I kind of miss the hustle and the bustle of the markets and the flood of all the different kinds of people that I had contact with and interacted with. I mean, looking back at my life then as a horticulturalist, which I was for 35 years, and then comparing that to my life now as a writer, it does impact on me how much time I spend alone these days. For all writers, this is an important factor in their working day. I'm pretty reclusive and have had to live most of my life in the throng of market life, rushing around from dawn until dusk. So the tranquility of my desk is actually a really wonderful retreat for me. Now, it may sound bliss, but this also does have some drawbacks, not just for myself. I mean, this applies to every writer, because the disconnection to write also removes the ability to talk and interact. And so therefore it can be really hard to actually get a real gauge of how your own books are actually being received, especially if you're a brand new writer. Looking back and being the new kid on the block alongside the other million or two published authors vying for shelf space and sales, as I was back when I started, can actually have some huge drawbacks. The most obvious being that local bookshops, who are under the pressure from just about everywhere in the book-selling world these days, they rank you as their lowest priority. It is actually quite hard getting into them, asking them to include your books on their shelves. The most difficult thing is getting out the word of your published work, and most importantly, actually meeting people who've read your work to give you their honest opinions. I've looked at the endless writers' forums over the years, and it does appear to be one of the hardest areas of a writer's life. A good, well thought out book takes tens of thousands of hours to write, and there are days when there does not feel like there are actually enough hours in the day just to fit everything in. I work more now than I think I ever have before, often working until the early hours of the morning, writing, promoting, and posting wherever I feel the word is needed, and then hoping at some point someone will take a few minutes to send a message or let me know what they think of the stories I've written. Most of the writers I associate with or have spoken to on the forums, they all suffer from the same massive lack of confidence in their work, as they know if the slightest thing is not right, the critics will attack and be merciless in their scorn. And that's something that can actually kill a book's sales. It can kill it dead. So if, like me, you're seen as new and unestablished, that can kill your writing career before you've even gotten it off the ground. Now, I'm a pretty upbeat person, having worked for myself for well over 20 years. But I've got no problems motivating myself to work because I absolutely love writing. So for me, it's a simple pleasure just emptying my thoughts onto the page. But even I've found that there are some days it feels like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. And feedback is the key, but it's not so easy to find it. Now, like all writers, I use Facebook and Twitter and many other social media networks, but these in themselves can actually be traps. If you're not careful, you can find yourself in a difficult situation. I have a Facebook page where I update as appropriate. I do make an effort not to fill it with the mundane routine of my life, or make it one long, tiresome advert for the books. I do actually put a great deal of effort into keeping it up to date with just the specifics that are required. Now, people can access it through my Twitter or my website, and also from Facebook itself. And when I first started out, it seemed to flow as the numbers rose rapidly, and it was really pleasing to see that I had what looked like some solid support. Now, well over 10 years later, with 14 books published and available, the numbers have fallen. And it's not because I'm doing anything wrong or different. It's just that the trends have changed and people spring clean their profiles once in a while. 15 years ago, I was trying to get published and was finding it very difficult, as most writers do these days. So those on Facebook, they really like the idea of supporting a struggling author. Now today, I've done it. I'm published, and I'm working on the 15th book. So it's much less appealing, and so they click off and follow someone else. It's a very fickle thing, and it's so hard to use as a gauge for your writing achievements. It's not all bad news, as I do get people who post or write a review in the reviews sections, and that can lift my day and make everything feel so much more worthwhile as I sit here all alone. Knowing that my words connected with another human being is a tiny moment of triumph that brings the all-important extra motivation to continue on writing. Emails and feedback are the source of extra inspiration and the only benchmark we loners in front of the keyboard have to guide us forward. It sounds sort of sad and depressing, but it does actually make a world of difference. Those few comments from the mass are a permanent source for the others to tap into. And that is how slowly, over a great deal of time, a writer finds his way through the media jungle to get noticed and begin to make a living out of his solitary career. You know, it's a sad fact that out of the millions of people sat writing in this world today, only about 2% of them will actually earn enough money to live off. You know, if they're self-published, it can take years to just earn back the money that they've invested, because every aspect of writing costs the author before the book is even finally produced. And as a writer of over 20 years now, I know it could be years before I break even. But one post at a time, I move forward and hope that someday I will do. If you love to write or follow other writers, and like myself, I've sought to find the books of those that I have followed, just think about what they've done alone in front of a desk. And if you've purchased online or you know of a social network group that are on, take a moment to look them up and write a few words to them. All writers give their words freely to anyone who takes the time to read them. So if you enjoy them, then send a few words back and tell them of your enjoyment. Because believe me, it really does make a huge difference. A few years ago, I was asked would I write an article on what it's like to be a writer. And when I was approached to write this, the remit kind of was, we want you to write a really honest appraisal of how you feel, you know, and what your life is really like. And like all things that are written, you know, it gets edited, whatever goes up. It's not the complete version of what you actually handed in. So what I wanted to do today is I've got the original. I found it on my computer a few weeks ago. And I want to read the original of what my take was. This is about 5 or 6 years ago now, of how I saw writing 5 or 6 years ago. And having read through it, I don't really think my opinion has changed a great deal. But I think for new writers, and maybe for readers, it's a piece that I think will shed a lot of light and give people ideas about what it's like to actually be a writer. And so with that in mind, I'm going to read out the article, the original article that I actually wrote. I was asked if I would like to describe my point of view of life as a writer. It seemed a little odd at first, I thought. Have they any idea what they're doing asking me? Because in many ways I have no clue as to what most other writers feel like, and I'm not entirely sure if I do know. I pondered the point and wondered if it's a feeling one gets with publication. Well, if it is, it saw me come in and hid. I really had no idea. I'm pretty much doing much of the same thing that I've always done, which is put one word after the other and hope that it makes some sort of coherent sense to someone. I'm often referred to as author. The thing is, I'm not really that comfortable with the term. I've always seen others as authors to be special or sacred, of which I feel neither. I usually, when asked, reply that I write for a living. I like that. It can imply many things, and it gets me out of the hole of having to then explain that I actually write books for a living. I think in many ways I'm a bit of a closet author, but actually that really does suit me down to the ground, as it means I have space to simply do what I do, which is write. An act I see as a process whereby I convert vast quantities of caffeine and nicotine into legible words on a page. Being asked to describe my life as a writer for the purpose, I assume, of educating new writers felt to me like a bit of an invasive operation at first. But as I sat back to consider things, I made what is my usual approach to just about everything I write, which loosely put meant I drank lots of coffee, grabbed a pad, and made sufficient notes to act as some form of guide. I felt I should at least ponder the point for a while before giving a comment, and so after some thought and a lot of scribbling, I put together the following in hope that it provides a little insight into my view of the world, while doing my best to flog a book or two along the way. I should add at this point, I see myself as just some bland and actually quite ordinary bloke whom, like most of us, has led a life filled with ups and downs. Women have never really fainted at my feet, and I've never really been in step with the rest of the world. To put my life in a nutshell, I've made the very real choice of avoiding people while watching them from a distance in the vain hope of learning about humanity. I published a few books and I have 1 or 2 followers on Facebook, so I think it's safe to say I'm nothing that special or out of the ordinary. Now, since publishing my first book, which was a very surreal experience, which involved a great many terms I've never even heard of before, like interior, which I assumed was the inside of a house, but was happy to discover it was actually the term given to the actual writing in the form of pages. I have to admit, I've also encountered a lot of myths about writers, and I'm happy to report that none of them fit me. So if there really is some sort of special person who becomes a writer, I think I've managed to dodge that particular bullet. What I do know about writing, and being a writer, is that most people think my life is easy. In their minds, I rattle off a few words, back it in a cover, and hey presto, I'm a millionaire. Oh, if only that it was really that easy. The sad truth is, very, very far away from the fact that most people just laugh when I tell them this. You know, it's like I just made some sort of ridiculous joke to them. Now, I understand that, I cannot talk for all writers, but I'm sure a great many would agree with me when I tell you that it's bloody hard graft, and at times it can be soul-destroying. I think maybe that was why Ernest Hemingway once said that he would sit in front of his typewriter and bleed. I really got that, because that made an awful lot of sense to me. Not only do I write, I also occasionally work with a few other writers, and for myself that provides a very unique opportunity of being able to compare notes on how others approach their work. It's one aspect of my work in life that I really do find fascinating, as it does allow my curiosity to kick in as I peep into another writer's world and make notes on how they work. It's startling at times to see how similar or how completely different we all approach the task of writing. This leads me to form the view that we all approach writing from a very, very different perspective. In being me, I chose the isolationist and often more indifferent approach. In most cases when I talk of writing, I tend to speak from the point of view of my own working practice, as I'm obviously a well-versed expert in my own approach. I've found my own little selection of comfy habits that allow me the time and the space to isolate myself, and then set to with the task in hand. I also find it easier to simply state my own journey from what was actually a secret writer to now published author. Most people appear quite surprised when I first talk openly about my own writing, which is actually quite rare, as the introverted part of me, which is the writer, tends to shy away from being around too many people. But in a one-on-one situation, I tend to express myself much better. They're really quite shocked when my opening response to their question is usually, "I wish I'd never published anything. I was a lot happier before then." Now, what as that may sound, writing makes me extremely tired and at times grumpy, as I drain my brain at high speed onto the page. And when whatever piece I'm working on is done, I just collapse and I sleep for several hours. Not writing makes me even grumpier, because the plot is always there in my head. I can be shopping when a great idea comes out of nowhere, but I'm out in the middle of the street with no desk or computer. And that drives me frantic, as I have to keep this mantra going on in my already crowded head to remember all of the shopping and the new addition to the story. I think my wife has become a very well-seasoned professional who notices as we chat that something completely unrelated to our conversation has suddenly popped into my head. And she sees the sudden change in me and then just packs me off with a smile to my desk, knowing the urgency that's coursing through me as I have to write it down. Honestly, at times it's like a curse. Have you any idea what it's like to be at a party when your head suddenly explodes into life? It's really, really awkward, because then all you want to do is find a nice quiet spot and scribble stuff down. Most people find it rude when my eyes glaze over, or I slip into my own little world and I pull an idea apart and reconstruct it in my brain. I've been called aloof and a snob, ignorant and downright rude in the past. But they really do not understand that this is kind of the level of conviction and dedication all writers have to the things that they write about. It's not our fault. We literally can never switch it off. You want to try living with all of the characters that I've created, having nervous breakdowns or getting into trouble and chatting away furiously in your head every second of every day. The story never sleeps, and sadly, neither do I now, because I'm up against deadlines. Now, I realise that this can all appear bad and somewhat off-putting, but it isn't really. As like all things in your life, you start to adjust. You find your comfort zones in which you can manage your writing life. I find being a writer also challenges me to be a better person. I think it's easy in sort of ordinary life to make snap judgments about certain situations, events, and other people. I would even say that in my long life, I've seen society change into something so different than the days of my youth. Something maybe I would have missed had I not been reflecting on everything. I don't think people are as kind or as open as they used to be. And in many ways, I think recent times has shown how closed off people have become from each other. Now, the wonderful thing about being a writer is that I've begun to understand how every person and how every event actually has a story behind it. And in many ways, my viewpoints on life have changed as a result. I no longer rush to judge what I see at first light. I actually tend to look for some sort of deeper understanding of why things are the way they are. And in your everyday life, that can make a massive difference in the way in which you interact with everything. I also feel that one of the greatest points of being a writer or a reader is that through the books we consume, we learn this art of looking on the ways that others live or have lived in the past. And I do feel that from that we can gain a lot of insight into people and our own lives, which is great fuel for creation. I'm now a part of that process, and I often sit back and reflect on life and its many wonderful attributes, some of which become parts of the stories I write. I mean, the prime example would be the Curio Chronicles or even Hans Cottage. Now, I'm not saying being a writer also makes me a much better person. I still have the very real ability to be a complete and utter arsehole. But I do think that because I try to see the story in other things, it has helped me to be kind of more informed as a watcher of the world. I think I understand myself a lot better than I used to, and that has given me a little sort of more inner peace. I think I deal with life better now. And, maybe than I used to do. I think I'm a lot happier. I came into publishing quite late in my life compared to many other authors. I think maybe I had to grow up a little first. I've always written things down and created small stories in my head for the kids to read, etc. I was a secret writer for years and I loved it. I love the process of creation and the freedom to play around with endless ideas that stretch the limits of my vast imagination. I mean, I still do, only now it's considered work, and whereas before, well, that was just my way of having some alone time to keep my creativity well exercised. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love writing. I'm not sure that I could go a day without stringing some words together. It's as important to me as breathing. But the problem that I find is that as soon as I publish a book, it all gets far too businesslike. Back in the carefree days of a non-published writer, all I had to do was write. Today, because of the way the world of books works, which by the way is so aggressive, not only do I have to write, but I have to do it to a deadline, and then once I'm done, I'm involved in so many different processes that suddenly my writing takes a back seat to everything else, and I really do not like or even enjoy that. Most writers struggle to get the word out, and contrary to popular belief, it's only, writing royalty that really do get all the big promotional stuff to support them. Us mere middle-list and lower-list writers, well, we have to get out and about and do it ourselves. So instead of writing with all of the time and the freedom in the world like I used to, I've now got web pages to maintain, social media sites to update and keep fascinating, promotions for book sales, and a whole host of other tasks to do every day. And it really is a lot of work to do before I can even consider sitting quietly alone to put down my latest idea. It can be exhausting, and at times I find it really frustrating. And for myself, it is not that much fun at times, especially considering I hate leaving my desk or the house. The modern media world is not a place for introverts like myself. I'm constantly told if I want book sales, I must sell myself and dazzle. But the simple truth is, I don't want to dazzle. I'm happy not to have photos of me plastered everywhere. I mean, have you seen my face? Who the hell is going to buy a book when they see that? I'm sure there are many sparkling and dazzling writers in the world who bang on about the joys of life on Twitter all day, posting details of their every movement. And I'm thrilled that they feel so at ease. But honestly, that's not really who I am. I never was before, and I'm not really that sorry that I'm still a tad dull in that respect. I absolutely hate the idea of sitting in a shop with a 4x4 picture of me on the wall behind me. Just thinking about it makes me shudder and want to hide under the bed. I hate selling my book. I mean, yeah, I know. Everyone tells me my attitude stinks. But honestly, think about it. Can you imagine? I hand a book to a person and I say to them, "Here, read this. It's brilliant." How messed up is that? I mean, I wrote the damn thing. And if I'm completely honest, I think it's a little bit cheeky and rude to do such a thing. Now, people tell me I'm old school and I need to modernize more. And maybe I am a little. But the way I see it, if someone who is not me hands a book to a person that's mine and then says to them, "You know what, this is a really great book, you should read it," well, that's okay, because they're recommending it based on their own enjoyment. I think it's somewhat hypocritical to recommend my own book. I mean, I've got no problems recommending another writer's book. I've read it, I've enjoyed it. So I'm honestly telling that person, this is really worth the money. Why does no one in the book industry really understand this? It's so hard to sell your own work. It kind of puts me on the spot, which is lethal. As I usually feel so ill at ease, I shift into humour as a sort of survival mode. And I cannot lie, it's got me into a lot of trouble. It still does. I once had a customer ask me, what happens at the end of the book? Now, alright, come on. Am I the only person alive who finds that to be a stupid question? Seriously, what writer, living or dead, would give away the final plot? My unappreciated response, which I cannot deny amused me, and completely put the customer off, was, well, the words stop. Now, come on, it's not me. I mean, that's funny. In this particular case, obviously not. I suppose me laughing did not really improve the situation, as my wife looked on a little displeased with my efforts. I'm honest about it. I don't want to do it. All I want is to do the one thing I love. I want to be sat at my desk, ploughing through the fields of my imagination, using it as the inspiration to make my next story even better than I planned it in the first place. The absolute worst things for me are all the sycophants. If I'm absolutely honest, when I'm out and about and friends meet up with me, seriously people, you do not have to buy the book or read it in order to know me. I'm still me. I've not changed. I still wear my jeans and tee. I don't shave nearly as often as I should. I'm always going to be scruffy, even if I was rich. And no, I honestly don't give a rat's ass if you've read it or not. Don't tell me you're going to buy it just to cheer me up, because I know you have absolutely no intentions of doing so. Honestly, do you not think I will know when the weekly report showing nothing has sold comes in? I really, really hate it. My life has become a long stream of embarrassed people who feel the need to impress me by committing to a purchase. I honestly only want people to read my books if they are genuinely interested in the kind of stories that I write. And the same to a degree goes for critics. Honestly, if you hate it, toss it in the bin. My interest is only in those who find the things I write about thrilling. Your over-bloated sense of self-importance is right at the bottom of my priorities list. I tell all new writers I work with to ignore the critics. I cannot tell you how many times I've read something written about mine or about other authors' books which was factually inaccurate to the point where I honestly wondered if they'd even read the book. It seems to me like they just look at the book's description and then they make some flyaway comment. I have no idea why these people are so important. Because if you actually take the time and then you look them up on Google, you usually find more often than not that they've hardly got any kind of real writing experience. So why are they fit to judge something that can take years to perfect? Do not waste your time looking at them. Look at the screen you write on. There is no such thing as a perfect writer. I find mistakes in every book that I read. It's human nature, and we all suffer from the same affliction. It can be a fun experience, though, when that neighbour who's ignored you for years, and ignored you for reasons you'll never really truly understand, suddenly stops you and races over to smile and welcome you like you've always been their best friend. My wife and I see them and we giggle. They rush over to ask us how I'm doing, and they always ask me the very same question. I actually wait for it, and then I say, and they say the very same words in my head with them as they speak. So, what's it like to be rich and famous now? I actually want to laugh hysterically. What is this myth that all writers are like J.K. Rowling or Dan Brown? It is a documented fact. Look it up. 90% of writers do not even earn the minimum wage. Most of us have a second income or working partners. Hell, if I add up my yearly income from writing, I could hardly afford a decent long weekend away in a good quality hotel. So let me just set that particular record straight for those who do not understand it. We write for no other reason than it's an affliction. I mean, seriously, it's like a limp or mumbling to yourself. We've got no idea why we write. It's certainly not for the money. We just do it. It's in our DNA or something. I've never been able to explain why my brain has this massive overload of noise and words. I mean, it just has. And assembling them into some sort of cohesive pattern on paper gives me a momentary rest and a quietening of the traffic. And that's it. That is why I write. If I was famous, I would still be scruffy. The only real difference would be that more people would stop me and want to talk to me when I'm actually in a hurry. So everything would take me twice as long to do. And I would probably end up in some sort of, magazine as an example of how famous people let themselves go with age. Honestly, I'm not in a hurry for that particular bus. Writing gives me great joy, and I've absolutely no idea why. All I know is when I sit alone in the quieter moments of my day and I tap away on the keyboard, something so magical happens. It blows my mind. I get excited and filled with some sort of meditative euphoria. I lose track of everything as I hammer away, and all of the pictures in my mind come into some sort of sharp focus. And that's it. When I'm done, I collapse and sleep. And it's a deep, contented, happy sort of sleep that makes me feel wonderful. Honestly, it's like a drug. In some cases, I would say it's better than drugs. All I can say is I need it, and I want it, and I am so happy. When I'm actually doing it, there really is no other rational explanation of it. Whatever this elusive trance-like state I enter for long periods of some of my days is, I want to live there forever. I've sat for 10 hours working and not even been aware of it. For me, it's quite normal to work until late into the night, and yet I get tired. But not until that last line, and then it hits me. The following day, I read through the previous night's work, and I can honestly say there are times that I sit back with a satisfied smile and I think, where the hell did that come from? Did I even write this? I'm sure there's some sort of magical word fairy that nips in, while I sleep and enhances the stuff that I write. It's a very odd sort of experience, and all I can say is that it's all down to the really deep levels of focus that wash over me when I write. Because I can say without doubt, when I write, I say things a hell of a lot smarter and with much deeper meaning than I do in my normal moments of life. Something I actually think my wife would be really happy to confirm for me. Much to the disappointment of all 6 of my adoring fans, I don't write for you. I write for me. This is my story, and it's written as I want it to be written. And I'm sorry if that crushes anyone, but it's the truth. No one has a say, not even my wife. I work everything out alone. I write alone. I do the first edit alone. And then and only then does my wife get to see what I've written. Now, I know a couple of people who listen to the points of views of others, but I find that that's not for me. And I would advise all writers to close out others and take absolutely no heed of their comments and views. I strongly believe you should only involve another party once the writing is done. I've worked with a beta group of readers. I did hear their comments on the finished work, and I did take them on board. It was a great help, but it was only a help because it gave me a deeper insight into the reader and how they view my work. And yeah, as a result, I actually improved the way that I wrote. But I never once allowed another living soul to dictate the storyline. That, I fear, is a road to hell. Now, after it's written, that's when I sit with my wife and I work through the manuscript. We both share the responsibility after that in cleaning it up. Because, to be honest, I'm a bit of a lazy writer who makes about 1 million mistakes. To me, she's the queen of the commas and speech marks. I do miss hundreds. And she finds them and highlights them for me to add later. My only rule of writing is get it down as quickly as possible, and then edit the shit out of it. And guess what? Even then, I still miss stuff. It is really, really impossible for me to proofread my own work. I think it's some sort of psychological thing. I know what's coming, and so my brain adds the missed words or full stops, and I simply do not notice them. And, I've skipped them when I was writing it, and even on the 3rd, 4th, 5th edit, I still don't see them. At some point, once you become a writer, everyone gives you their advice on how to write, which I kind of find ironic, because everybody waits until you're actually published. I think a little advice beforehand would have served a much better purpose. But once done, they all come out of the woodwork. It was, in my humble opinion, a tad too late. The book was already out, and it was on the shelves, and there was not a great deal I could do to improve it at that point. Believe me, you will meet that person who will take a great deal of pleasure in pointing out your shortcomings. They will give you a kind word and then slap you in the face with a comment such as, "I've read your book. It was a good read." This is the compliment, so wait for it. Although, I'm not sure I would have written it that way. Your style is somewhat different. I've learnt to bite my tongue and smile, while imagining ripping off their head and using it for a football. But the sad truth is, there will always be one or two asshats out there who will try to put you down. It was about this time, in my early life of publishing, that I discovered or encountered the term, and it's a term that I've grown to despise, and it is the term, the craft. When people talk about the craft of writing, I usually yawn and fall asleep. Is it a craft? I've got no idea. I simply know that when I read back what I've written, which is usually out loud, if it's not right, I tend to notice and make changes. Now, if that's a craft, then wonderful. I have the gift. I use a text-to-speech program on my computer, which reads my own writing back to me for editing purposes. I set it in a really dull, boring voice, and believe me, when you've written something wrong, it leaps out of the speakers at you. It's a really good tool that I've really come to love as I work. Now, at this point, I should mention I simply love writing. I got your ordinary everyday education in the 1970s, which, I do consider to be of a much higher standard than today's, much to the disapproval of my teacher friends. I loved English and English literature. They were my favourite subjects, which finally makes sense to me now, as I spent 35 years working in horticulture before having a writing career today. I actually did want to be a journalist, but I was told to not even try when I left school, as I was too fast a writer who scribbled my illegible scrawled notes on stories across paper like a spider who'd race through the ink pot. Like now, my mind has a habit of running off without me, which I now realise is my true passion about what I'm doing. But back then, a story that was filled with missing commas and words was not acceptable. I realise now that scribbling down is okay on a computer, as later it can be edited at leisure. But sadly there were no computers then, and so I took up working in the dirt, something that I found involved a lot of research and working with plants, which is still actually applicable to my scruffy writer me in the work that I do now, writing about woodlands and trees and the magic within them. I don't see myself as complicated, although I'm sure a few people I know would give a really good counter-argument on that. When writing, I like to keep things as simple as possible. I like my work to be easy to follow. I like it to be captivating and a straightforward read for the reader. I don't try to concern myself with the views of other writers. In my opinion, they have their way and I've got mine, and never the twain shall meet. I believe with passion that communication is the greatest asset of humanity, and that writing is the greatest achievement of mankind. It is the simplest of things, and yet it is profound on so many levels. I can take what is trapped inside my inner self, and then I can use words on a page to convey that to another human being in another country who I've never even met. I can make them smile or even make them cry. Tell me there's no such thing as magic. That's wonderful. It has to be the greatest thing ever, and I have the joy of doing that on a daily basis. It's not a craft, it's a gift. And I, for one, am delighted to tell you all that every single one of you has actually got the skills to do it. I discovered the craft when joining an online forum many years ago now, which was set up for new writers, which was one of the tips recommended to me after I'd actually published my first book. Now, this site had loads of people talking shop, and I settled in to take it all in. There was one girl in particular, she was very young, and she offered a small piece to be critiqued. Now, I read it and I enjoyed it. It was a little thin and needed some padding out, but I actually felt it was worth working with and would be in time a really nice little story. And I told her that, which really delighted her. Now, she did confess that she'd been terrified of uploading it to the site, but I actually commended her on her bravery and told her to keep going. And then suddenly, well, let's just say, for politeness, this grumpy old badger came online and he absolutely assassinated her piece. He tore it to shreds and banged on line after line about the craft. I thought he was cruel and just plain nasty. It was not that bad a story, certainly compared to some of the other flowery drool that I'd read on this site. Her story was imaginative and inspired, but he just banged on about the standards of the writing craft, and for want of better words, he publicly crucified her. Now, he was wrong. His behaviour in my mind was just plain horrible and nasty. I messaged him to complain and tell him that he had gone overboard and that our story actually had a lot of potential. Now, okay, I realise I'm not schooled in modern writing. I've just developed my own way over time. People say I have a particular writing style, but to be honest, I wouldn't recognise it if it hit me in the face. I just write the only way I know how. And I may not be rich or famous, but I do have some fans who love what I write. So I argued my point that writing has changed since Queen Victoria was on the throne, which, okay, probably didn't help us bond. But his language towards it was absolutely wrong, because if there's one thing I know, language is changing all of the time. And the younger, more modern writers are embracing that. And I think it should be considered. We're far too quick these days to hoist up the classic literature banner and then disregard new work. I love the classics, but if you actually take a moment and look at how J.K. Rowling got panned by the critics, because she did, Harry Potter at first was absolutely crucified. So did Dan Brown, and the Da Vinci Code is a fantastic story, but a lot of critics put it down. Both of them have written books that are selling millions of copies. So the way I see it, they tapped into something at that time the rest of the book industry hadn't. And it was that approach which made them the stars of modern literature that they've become today. He completely disregarded my points and stuck to his mantra of the craft. A lot of people today are leaving reading. Modern technology's crept in with film, TV and instant video channels, and maybe it's some of these younger new writers who will invigorate the book world. I feel they should be encouraged. And as much as classic literature has its part, the literature of tomorrow will be completely different from today. Now, sadly, my voice fell to the floor unheard as I was dismissed for not supporting the craft. Needless to say, I left the site, and any ideas of embracing this so-called craft went right out of the window for me. Today I stick to what I know, which is very little, but it makes me and a few others who've read my work quite happy. I came to writing alone, and after 43 years of my life, usually writing all kinds of odd sorts of bits and bobs, I had one particular story in my mind for a very long time, and it made, I made a huge pile of notes on it. So much so I realised it had become a fire hazard, and if my house was ever to catch fire, I would be burnt to death in minutes. It made complete sense at that time to convert what was the huge mass of stacked, handwritten papers into digital documents. And hey, guess what? When I finished, Suddenly, I had like a whole other space by the wall for yet another bookcase. Being a little bit of an obsessive freak, I realised during the digital conversion of my stack that it'd be easier in the long run if it was all filed in some sort of organised and tidy way. And so by the time I finished, I realised I had a book. Most people are disappointed when I tell them that. Well, sadly, I didn't set off to actually write the story in full. I just got a little bit carried away at a time when I needed to escape from reality. And it just so happened that it became my very first manuscript. And I can hold my hand up and say, hey, look at me, I'm an accidental author. I feel the shame and hang my head riddled with guilt. I wrote a book by accident. It was never some sort of challenge or goal. I knew I could write stuff. I'd been doing it for years. The problem was, this time I got caught, and sadly that person felt the need to tell everyone. I cannot put into words how reluctantly I handed over what I'd written for them to read. I mean, seriously, for a moment I considered wrestling them to the ground and binding their mouth with tape to keep them quiet. Absolutely no one knew, because it was my hidden pleasure, and I never meant for anything to ever be read. But my very gabby mate, he told the world, didn't he? And then, of course, he told my dad. Have you any idea how hard it is to change the subject every time someone mentions reading to an avid reader like my dad? It was a nightmare ducking and weaving until finally he cornered me, and I had to hand over the manuscript to him so that he could read it. Honestly, I wanted to die on the spot. That was when all the attention and hype started. I mean, all I wanted was to be left in peace, but oh no, they were obsessed. I had a constant stream of conversations on how I should publish. Well, they weren't exactly conversations, they were kind of more one-sided. Them telling me to publish and me trying to change the subject. Now, don't get me wrong, I love authors. Tolkien, John Wyndham, H.G. Wells, Arthur Conan Doyle, Philip Pullman. I mean, all of them are my absolute ideal of great writers. I just felt like I did not belong in their company, and I would rather have remained lost in a room somewhere else with my trusty old desktop PC. Because that when it all started, everyone hassled me, telling me, you must publish so I can buy it. Let me just be clear, and let's clear the air actually at this point. As nice as it is to be told by everyone, it's a great book, publish it, and I will buy a copy. Once again, I'd like to remind you all that you're all actually really, really big liars. It's like some sort of secret trend to harass writers into doing something they don't want to do. I made a list of every person who promised to buy a copy, all 231 of them. Now, I know, okay, I'm a little weird like that, but in all honesty, it does sort of play tricks on your mind, or at least it did mine at the time. I started thinking, wow, this is unreal. If all these people want a book, then how many others might buy it? Listen to me now. Do not do it. It is a trap. By the time my first book came out on launch week, I sold 50 of them. Yep, just 50. And hardly any of them went to the people on the list. It was a really good lesson to learn at that point, because it's like a sickness. And I would say to anyone who wants to be a writer and put a book out, a lot of people will say they will buy it. But when you hold a copy in front of them, you will get one or two responses. The first being, oh dear, I don't have enough cash on me at the moment. Can you get it online? If I had £1 for every time someone said that to me, I would treble my writer's income. The second excuse, which is by far the most used, is, what? I have to pay for it? I thought we were mates. Everybody wants a copy, but nobody wants to shell out the money for it. My wife and I work on the assumption that out of every 200 people who say they will buy a book, only one of those people will. and to date, we've actually been pretty accurate. I blame the current obsession we have with celebrity culture. When confronted with an author, people go into some sort of bizarre default setting that makes them smile a lot and make unrealistic promises in the hope that you will like them. I've got one friend who used to introduce me, as his mate. He'd be like, "Hey guys, this is Rob." Sadly, not anymore. Now he's like, "Guys, have you met my friend, the author?" I find it a most peculiar phenomenon. It's almost like these people feel a strong desire to be liked by a famous person. But the problem with that, which they've not really, realised and stumbled upon, is actually quite simple. Most writers are just ordinary people, and they're not at all famous. In truth, we're a bit of a disappointment. Although, I do love the idea of some random woman rushing home to boast about meeting me and being confronted with a lot of confused family faces who look at her like she's completely mad and say, "Who the fuck is that?" Followed by, "Never heard of him." It does cheer my day. The truth is, when over 2 million books get published every year, there are one hell of a lot of us out there. And we're not all rich, and we're certainly not famous, which is something I'm currently quite happy about. I sat and I worked out that if I should take into account all of the places that I visited to photograph for my writing work, because I do help it to, I do use pictures to help me describe places, and all of the books that I bought for researching, all of the paper I've purchased for printouts, the heating of my home to writing, the electric used by the computer and lighting, and all of the fuel I've burned up travelling around for research, I would easily need to sell well over 1 million books to even come close to breaking even. If I add to that all of the man hours that are involved in the production of the books that I write, and they were then charged at minimum wage rate, at my current selling rate, I would need another 300 years to fully recover what I've invested into my own personal writing life. If you want to write for the money, by all means try. No one, not even the biggest publishers, can predict what will and what won't sell. And yeah, you may have a bestseller inside you. No one will know until you actually do it. I personally believe that it should never even be about the money, because writing is not a way to stay afloat. It is a joy of hidden magic that lives inside you, and you can choose to release it into the world or hide it away forever. It's completely up to you. What I can say is I've had equally as many days of wonder as I have had despair, and I'm still doing it. It involves a lot of self-motivation. There have been days when I sat in bed staring at the cat, who was far more motivated than I was, although I hadn't fed him at that point, which probably explains a lot. I have days of endless frustration deleting a month's worth of writing because I knew it was simply not good enough, and I've started again from scratch. Writing on a bad day can be the equivalent of chewing dry sawdust, as the frustrations to get it right builds inside me. I feel sorry for my wife, who, bless her, tolerates my grumpiness as I walk around the house itching to write and unable to type a word. The good days are glorious. It can come from the form of a wonderfully written piece, or a lovely email, a comment on social media, a sales report, or a good review from a total stranger. I really still get a buzz knowing someone I'll never meet is so touched by some of my words, they feel the need to write something nice about my book. It really can lift your day, your week, or your year. There are few people who get very excited when they know I'm about to release a new title. But you know what? It's really wonderful to see their reaction and the excitement that they feel. I really feel happy for them, and I take great heart from that. There's no greater thrill than looking at a bookcase and seeing your own name on a spine and thinking, wow, I actually did that. And those days have far more value than mere money. By far, the most joyous moments come when you're completely alone, walking free in your make-believe world with people who are as well known to you as your best friends. I sit with the headphones on, looking at the screen, with my mind ablaze with the images of my own creation, so lost in thought and focused, nothing can touch me as the magic surrounds me and holds me trance-like in this theatre of joy. My mind, my heart, and my soul join as one, mixing in every experience and emotion I've ever had. And I smile as I tap away with my characters, or I cry the tears of their pain. No film can come close to the immersive experience of writing. Now at this point I'll add a very, very important health warning, because you do get lost in space and you get lost in time, and believe me, you'll not be aware of anything else. So when, as happened to me, my 8-year-old daughter got up at 2 o'clock in the morning with tummy ache, and I was sat in the almost darkness of my room typing away, lost to everything, I did not notice her pale white figure approach until she touched my arm with her cold white hand. I do not jest when I state it was the most terrifying experience, and almost the last line that I ever wrote. Such was the terror that coursed into my heart, filling it with fear and surprise. She scared the living shit out of me, which in turn scared the hell out of her as I leapt straight into the air with a scream of abject terror. So be advised, writing can be traumatic, not only to the author but also to their children. This is probably why I don't write ghost stories. I feel it's taking far too big a risk in what can already be a slightly risky situation. I left my known profession to become a full-time writer. Most people thought I was insane at the time, and maybe I am. But there again, I sit at my desk and I write down all of the daydreams that I had as a child, which I was told actually were bad for me. So actually, I get to do it now for a living, which is utterly delightful. It was a huge step for me to walk into the unknown, and life for me took a downward step in comparison to before because of it. But I don't think that I'm ever going to regret it. I'm now 59 years old and actually a lot happier than I have ever been. I will freely admit that I can juggle bills better than a circus clown juggles batons, but any ideas of switching career now is unrealistic for me, because having done this now for well over 14 years, it has been suggested, but I love doing this too much. And there again, if I really do sit and think about it, what else can I do now at my age? Writing suits me. I've always been a tad rebellious, and I've spent most of my life searching for some form of livable peace and freedom. I just wish I'd realised sooner that I've always had it. Most self-help books will tell you happiness and peace come from within. Well, I suppose they're right, as well as expensive, because, I'm living proof. As I look inside on a regular basis to find the materials I need to work with. And after 35 years of working in every kind of weather outdoors, I found my small place of peace and happiness sat before a computer screen, inventing new worlds and new people, and then telling their story as only I know how to. Life can be tough for millionaires, but I'm not one. So if there are tough days for me too, well, I suppose I'll ride that out daydreaming until all the happy days come along, and then I'll write about them. Huge thanks, because this has actually been the longest podcast I've ever done, but I think it's a really worthwhile one, especially if you want to have a future where you consider writing. As always, huge thanks to everybody for listening in today, and I really hope you enjoyed what I think is a little bit different and bit of a change from just writing about the stories to looking more at how they came about. I'll be back next week with another episode. If you've enjoyed today, please like and subscribe to the podcast, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.